Daily Telegraph's lead on the West's warning to Iran, with 6 American, British, and French warships sailing through the Straits of Hormuz in defiance of Tehran's threats to close the strategic waterway.
Now, moving on to the violence in Syria, and the Dubai-based Gulf News details a decision by Saudi Arabia to withdraw its observers from the Arab League mission to the strife-torn country.
Greek debts leads the Financial Times, which says private owners of the country's bonds have made what the paper calls their maximum offer of losses they're willing to absorb to avoid a default.
The Times looks at what it calls the stunning win for Newt Gingrich in the South Carolina primary, but warns the race to be the Republican Party's nominee for president could become a bitter and protracted dispute.
The economy is sure to be a big issue for the U.S. presidential race, and the International Herald Tribune focuses on one aspect of the debate, repatriating jobs from overseas. The paper analyzes the technology giant Apple, which develops its products in America and employs tens of thousands of overseas workers to assemble them.
And The Independent says 3 art lovers travelled thousands of miles and spent thousands of dollars visiting 11 galleries across the world, displaying spot prints by the British artist Damien Hirst. But it could be a worthwhile investment, apparently, because Hirst has promised a print that could be worth thousands to fans who complete the journey. There you have it.
There you have it. Sally and I are now joined by Bundeep Rangar, chairman of IndusView, to take a look at the top stories now. Welcome to the program, Bundeep. Great to see you. A warning from the West. You have the USS Abraham Lincoln, the HMS Argyll out there, a show of strength. Is this enough to, first of all, deter Iran? Because it seems clear they're on a path somewhere. And the impact on the global economy.
Well, first of all, just keep in mind this is a very strategically important choke point, right? You got 20% of all the world's oil that gets traded goes to this place, 35% of all seaborne oil. And by the way, 85% of this goes to Asia. So the real economies benefiting from this move by the United States and US and European countries are actually China, India, Japan, South Korea. Remember back in 1988, there was another conflict between the U.S. naval forces and the Iranian forces. They had a skirmish, a couple of gunboats got shot, and actually the same year they accidentally, tragically, shot down an Airbus as well.
Yes.
So this is a precedent here, which is there's a warning shot to be fired, but you can't go too far, especially when you get civilians involved. And that's something that the U.S. Navy or the West naval forces will have to really carefully watch out for. So sending a strong message, but not kind of stepping over the line, unless, of course, Iran escalates it.
Do you think that, I mean, obviously there's various means and ways, and there's various ways of sending a message. Now, the EU foreign ministers are discussing a ban on imports today for Europe. But as you say, a lot of Iranian oil goes to Asia. And if Asia were to step in as well, that would be very significant, would you say?
Absolutely, because it's not just, I mean, there's a measure to curtail Iran's exports, and already countries like India are looking for alternatives. But the Strait of Hormuz is not just Iranian oil. It's Iraqi oil, it's UAE, it's Kuwait, it's part of Saudi oil exports as well. So it's strategically more important than just Iran's exports. And I think with the pressure on Iran on its nuclear program and the stepping up of strategically important imperatives there, I think it's going to be one where diplomacy has to find a way through. Otherwise, we're going to get into a very tricky situation militarily.
Diplomacy finding a way through. I don't know if that's going to happen in Syria. The Saudis have withdrawn their observers from the Arab League mission. And our top story today, they're asking President Assad to step down. Pretty unlikely. They've already responded. Where does this go next?
The whole area, I grew up in Iran as a kid, so this is very, very close to home. Syria, on the other hand, is a very different place because you've got the Arab League now against it. And clearly there's been issues between Saudi Arabia, a Syria-backed assassination of a Saudi diplomat some time ago. So there's a cause for concern because the Arab League is stepping up pressure, and while they have monitors there, like over 100 of them in the region, they're losing faith in what the monitors are doing. And if you get to the point where you don't have a moderate intermediary that represents the rest of the Arab world, it risks a greater isolation for Syria than already there is. And therefore some kind of knee-jerk reaction that could either cause more civilian killings, which we've already seen, or an international effort to take him out, which we've seen in Libya in the past. So you're losing the kind of middle ground of diplomacy, which the Arab League somewhat represents. That's dangerous.
Now let's have a look at this story that is our top story in business, this situation as far as the private bondholders discussions with the Greek government is concerned. And obviously, according to the Financial Times, Charles Dallara, who is heading up the Institute of International Finance, which is representing the private bondholders, he's saying, look, our cards are on the table. This is the final offer now. We will not budge beyond this. And this is looking at a loss of 65 to 70% on current Greek bonds long-term value. That's kind of as far as they're likely to go. What do you think the outcome of this is going to be? Well, because it's a no-win situation for everyone, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the question is, who's got a greater negotiation power on this, right? Is it if you owe somebody $1 million, it's one thing. When they're owing you $100 million, then the power shifts from the lender to the borrower. So in this case, Greece has some power, because what are the alternatives? So we know that Greece has a $14 billion payment due in March. We know there's a second rescue package being put together worth a lot more. But at the same time, the bondholders don't have many alternatives. They have to swap in their short-term ones for long-term debts, and the question is, can it find a solution where you get a greater yield as time goes on?
But if the interest rate is so minimal on that long-term debt, they might just say, well, gosh, let's just take our losses now and let's, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
that's kind of their bargaining chip, is it? I don't know. I'm just trying to second-guess these people.
Well, there is some talk about, if you have a long-term debt and you have an interesting increasing yield over time, that there may be a sweetener of some sort. So if the Greek GDP recovers, growth accelerates, they actually get a little bonus on the yield. That may be one way around it. But at the end of the day, they have to find a way through this, because you can only go so far on the haircuts, and whether it's 50% or 65% is where the negotiation
I don't think a haircut's the right phrase. I think getting the clippers out and
having a shave,
more like you and me, then, is it?
But it's interesting that one analyst is actually quoted in the story saying that nothing substantive has been achieved on structural reforms in the past 18 months in Greece. But let's move on now and look at the big political story over the weekend. Newt Gingrich back in the race. And it's interesting that several months ago, everyone declared this man's campaign dead. He's back in the race against Mitt Romney, the richer, some would say better-looking candidates, but seems a bit wooden. We can only expect this to get really nasty now, Bundeep.
Yeah, Time Magazine Man of the Year some time back, Newt Gingrich there. Look, 3 different states, 3 different winners, right? So you've got one of the most divided Republican Party leadership races here going on.
Florida next.
Florida next, where, Newt seems to be leading the polls, which is, again, a big surprise. I guess the one person who's probably taking glee from all of this is Obama, because if you've got Newt winning, you've got the ultra-conservative vote for him there, which is going to send a lot of the moderates in Obama's favor.
Well, he has the State of the Union coming up tomorrow, an opportunity to try and shift the focus back to himself with all the attention on the Republicans right now.
It's quite interesting, though, because as you say, Newt Gingrich looked like he was out the battle not so long ago, and it just goes to show you can never write anyone off in this situation, can you? Now, let's have a look at the International Herald Tribune. I think this is a really interesting article about basically the US trying to bring jobs back home, and the difficulty in practically doing that. Apple, for example, not so long ago, Apple boasted its products were made in America. Not so now. We all know that most of the parts and the assembly of the iPhone, the iPad, and everything else is done by companies like Hon High Precision and others in Asia. How do you change that? That's such a tricky thing. Labor's so cheap there.
Absolutely.
It's just a different scenario, isn't it?
Their products now, the past few years now have been saying designed in America as opposed to made in America. And that's a key part. You have some of the intellectual property design side in a high-cost environment, where you have the manufacturing in a low-cost environment. Now, that's been going on for years. Microsoft software, Windows software, has always had programmers in Bangalore putting code into the software, except you don't just see it visible. It doesn't say made in India in the software code package. So these are multinational companies. To try and give them a national cubbyhole, I think is wrong, because what makes them globally competitive and makes Apple profitable about $400,000 a year per employee, the most profitable company in the world, is that international aspect of it. If you take that away, you make it lose some of its competitive advantage.
Well, the answer to Sally's question as to whether those jobs can come back, Steve Jobs quoted in the story saying those jobs are not coming back. We'll have to see how that plays out. In the election year, it was President Obama asking that question.
We haven't got time to ask Bundeep if he likes ours.
12 seconds.
Damien Hirst?
I think we're going to have to leave it there.
Thanks
very much. There we go. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll be back with more news shortly.
Bye-bye.